that started. And I'm just thrilled to welcome you all to this alumni career webinar, where we're focusing on 10 coaching skills every leader should master with Hallie Crawford. I'm Maura Sweeney, the Director of Alumni Career Development at Holy Cross, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's webinar offered exclusively for the Holy Cross community. We'll be together for an hour today. After the formal presentation, Hallie will take questions from you for as long as time allows. And I encourage you to submit questions throughout the presentation by using the Q&A function located on the webinar control panel. We also have a number of questions that came in from registration, and we'll make a point to incorporate those as well. This presentation is recorded, as I mentioned, and will be made available to all participants in a few days. So keep an eye out on your email. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to today's speaker. Hallie is a certified career coach, speaker, author, and national career expert with 20 years of experience. Her company is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. She is regularly featured in the media on Forbes, CNN, Money Magazine, Wall Street Journal, and has undergraduate and graduate degrees from Vanderbilt University and the University of Illinois. With over 1,500 success stories, her team of coaches helps professionals find jobs that make them want to jump out of bed in the morning to go to work. And doesn't that sound wonderful? With that, I will hand things over to Hallie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Maura, and for that introduction as well. It makes me crack up. It's true. And obviously I wrote, that's my elevator speech. And it also makes me kind of grin each time I hear it as well. Thrilled to be here with you all today. We really appreciate your time and attention. We know that so many of us obviously are on Zoom calls and, different types of media all the time. So appreciate your time today for one more. And we are going to be talking about 10 kind of basic coaching skills, if you will, that we feel like every leader should master. And what we want you all to know too is that these coaching skills are especially relevant during COVID and working from home and working remotely. They're even that more, much more important because it's so hard to stay motivated and engage as, the coronavirus and, COVID lockdown and everything else kind of drags on. So as Maura said, I'm Hallie Crawford. I'm a certified career coach. I've been coaching and training for over 20 years now. Actually, this year is our 21st year in business. I kind of joke that I had like an early life crisis, and I was fortunate enough to start my company in my late 20s when I lived in Chicago, and then moved down to Atlanta after that and was able to kind of move things seamlessly. And we have been working remotely for a long time. So the easy part about COVID for us was kind of this easy transition because we've been doing webinars virtually for so long. Did want to mention to you all just briefly that we know that a lot of people are struggling with different situations due to COVID, and whether it's being furloughed or laid off, etc. So we are trying to put out as much helpful information and articles and tips and tools as possible. So please feel free to visit our website and specifically our career blog, and also feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn because we know a lot of people are struggling in different ways, and we want to help as much as we possibly can. So let's look at what we're going to talk about today. Here's kind of our basic agenda, if you will. I'm going to give you kind of our definition of coaching at the beginning to help frame things out and what we mean by coaching versus being a mentor, being a therapist, et cetera, and how that works. We're going to go through 10 critical coaching skills. Now, I know we have a certain amount of time today, so we're going to touch on each of those skills briefly, but there are 2 or 3 that we'll go into a little bit more depth because those are the ones that we find are the most useful and helpful to kind of start out with. And then at the very end, we'll give you some suggested homework. Let's go ahead. We're going to do our first poll here in just a second. Maura, if you want to pop that up, that'd be great. But I did want to let all of you know, as Maura said, this is going to be recorded, but if anyone would like a copy of the PowerPoint, please feel free to email us. We'd be happy to share that with you. The email address is on the screen. So we're really curious first, kind of the demographic, so to speak, of our audience. Why are you interested in coaching skills? Is it I'm a new leader and I need to figure this out. I want to take on more senior leadership roles, so kind of enhance my skill set there. Are any of you experiencing, this managing kind of difficulties between or amongst employees or your team? And obviously, because of working from home, a lot of us are kind of feeling that, and tensions are a little bit higher. So if you could fill this out, that would be great. And we'll give you a minute to do that. And then we'll share the results in just a second. And by the way, if it's a different reason, obviously that's okay too. The things that we're going to be discussing today will go across the board and help everyone in those different scenarios, just FYI, okay? But it's good to know kind of where you guys are at. All right, so thanks for participating in that. Okay, great. So we've got 44% is taking on a more senior leadership role, whether you want to or already are, that's fantastic. And then managing difficult situations and relationships, and then new leader is the third, but actually the other is too. So please feel free as we go today, just kind of quick housekeeping items also. If you have questions as we progress, and if anyone would like to share what their other situation is, please feel free to put that in the chat or in the Q&A section, because we'd love to kind of read those out as well. So feel free to ask any questions as we go, but make comments too, because that would be really, really helpful for us as well. And just by the way too, when I'm looking back and forth, I've got the dual screen, as I'm sure most of us do. I think we have some clients who actually like have 3 or 4 screens now. I'm not sure I could personally handle that, but at least having the 2 is really, really helpful. So here's the deal with, thinking about leadership strengths and skills is there's so many different effects for people of working from home because of COVID-19. Some of us feel like more frantic, stressed, like we're working all the time because we don't have this natural boundary between work and home life. Some people and some of your teammates or employees may feel disconnected or less motivated as a result. And it's harder for us as leaders, as part of the second bullet point here, it's a little bit harder for us as leaders to provide the context of why we're working on a certain project, or why we're working on a specific task, et cetera, and give a little bit more background. It was easier to do so when we're in the office. So one of the things that we're telling our clients is kind of err on the side of over communicating with people on your team, et cetera, because we don't have that natural water cooler talk, et cetera. Okay. And it's really important to think about the kind of gaps that we need to fill in order to lead remotely, as well as, when we get back to the office. And I did want to tell you also, one of the things to think about as a leader in terms of these, effects from working from home is we are honestly hearing the gamut of kind of situations or reactions from clients. Some clients are saying, I can't stand working from home. Most of my social life was, my peers at work. And I just feel like so unmotivated, and it's hard for me to feel like I'm staying connected. And those people, a lot of times, understandably, are either, single, maybe no one else is in the home, or they're those extroverts that really crave and need that social interaction. So you need to think about the people that you're working with in terms of not just their strengths, but their personality type as well, and how this may be impacting them. We've had other clients on the other spectrum say, I don't ever want to go back to the office. And how do I tell my boss that? So one client in particular, who's kind of an extreme example of this in Chicago, his boss is kind of pressing him to go back into work sooner than later, and he doesn't want to do it at all. So it ranges. Everyone is going to have a very different experience of this and reaction to it. And so as much as you possibly can as a leader, you want to try to meet them where they are and understand each person individually, and understand, in terms of like how fulfilled or antsy or not they are based on, working from home, but also how they're managing it from a structure perspective, because people who are much more structured and good at operations, et cetera, are going to be a little bit better about creating that schedule for themselves, the daily schedule, versus other people need that external kind of structure, and they may have a harder time with it. All right, so let's talk first about the definition of coaching and what we mean by coaching for the purposes of what we're talking about today. So in a perfect world, coaching in its truest, purest form is technically not about telling people what to do. And we realize that as leaders, sometimes we need to do that. That's part of being the boss, and that's okay. But coaching in its purest form is technically about helping someone learn something on their own, or try to figure something out on their own, or asking them the right questions so that they're thinking about things in the right way, or maybe they can take a different perspective on something. So it's supposed to be about helping someone learn in order to improve their performance. And ideally, it's not about just issuing instructions. It's more about helping them find the answer on their own, demonstrating something to them, giving them feedback, explaining, kind of the parameters around something, or encouraging them. Okay, so one of the things we want, and we believe that good leaders do a good job of, is they're able to put on kind of different hats, if you will. I need to be the boss right now and, kind of lead my team and tell them what to do, versus in this instance, for example, they put on their coaching hat and ask them the right questions instead, or give them that encouragement or feedback. So what coaching is and isn't on this next slide, and it's a method or kind of tools to provide guidance to professionals to help them be more successful in their role. Ideally, it's supposed to help them or empower them to find their own answers as much as possible. They're not always going to do that, but as much as possible. And it's not therapy, but as a good leader, we do need to get more comfortable, especially I think during these times, being comfortable allowing our team and our employees, et cetera, to vent a little bit and be a little bit better about checking in with them and how they're doing and how they're feeling. Okay, so feelings are going to need to be addressed. This doesn't mean suddenly you become their therapist. That's part of why HR is there, and you don't spend your whole meeting on these things. But we encourage our clients, especially these days, to check in with people a little bit more than you normally would, ask them how they're doing balancing work and home life, and be more comfortable kind of letting them just get their feelings out on the table a little bit more. And coaching technically is not consulting, but consulting may be required at times. Again, that's the advice giving, like we said. So that's our foundational kind of definition, if you will, of coaching. Here are the 10 coaching skills that we would like you all to consider starting to work on, through the rest of this year, because we realize there's a lot of them. So you may say to yourself, okay, so I'll, start to implement this and, Q3, 4, et cetera. And what I would encourage you all to do as we talk today is to start to write down like 2 or 3 that you feel you need to get a little bit better at out of the 10 to just get, the ball rolling. The other thing that I'll say about all of these as well is that the good news is that they're very much interrelated. So when you start to work on one of them, the active listening, for example, and the self-management, all of the others kind of flow from that a little bit more too. So think about them, yes, as separate individual skills, but ones that it's kind of like weaving a blanket together, so to speak, or knitting a sweater where they all kind of impact each other. All right, so let's talk about our first coaching skill. And the way that we as coaches kind of describe this is what we would call, creating a safe space, so to speak. Okay, and so if we could launch our second poll here, that would be great. We're curious what you all would say, kind of what helps you in the past or currently, what helps you be more willing to be open with someone professionally? To either give them feedback, to ask a question, to give your opinion, etc. And we've got 3 options here: trust, empathy, and them being open with me. And obviously these are clues to things that you want to do as a leader, but we're kind of curious which ones you all feel the most strongly about. And as we go through these too, these are the things you want to be thinking about. All right. Just wanting to strengthen my skills. Oh, good. And while we're doing the poll, one person shared with us his reason for being here today. Thanks, John, for that. Another reason for him being here is wanting to strengthen my skills. So that's perfect. That's awesome. So I think that what we're going to be talking about today will build on some of the skills that you all have as well, kind of take them to the next level, which I like. All right. Thanks for sharing the results. Okay, cool. So it's so interesting to me because with different webinars, you get different answers kind of depending on, I think, where people are at. So trust is our first one. That is a huge one. And just so you all know, all of the tips we are going to be talking about today, including this first one, are going to help you build a greater sense of trust with your team. That is such a core foundational part or component to coaching, that all of these are going to help with that. Empathy is our second one. They will help with that as well. And then them being open with me. I'll tell you a quick anecdote and then we'll talk about this slide. So we had I worked with a client who was a CEO of a startup out in Idaho working with their MBA students. And he admitted to us that a lot of the people in his organization were kind of intimidated by him. He was a really big guy, ex-military, big personality. And he realized he needed to change that. People were intimidated, so they weren't asking questions, giving their feedback, opinion, etc. And one of the things he started to do right away consistently in meetings is started to share stories from his past early on in his career when he was having a hard time and stumbled and fell in mistakes that he made. And he was able to turn around the culture of his organization within the next year or so, only because, or just by doing that one thing, just being more transparent and open with people. So here are the other things that we would suggest on this slide to help you develop that greater sense of trust, empathy, etc. One of the things we want leaders to do more effectively is to more proactively structure their relationships with people and conversations when they're one-on-one, but also in meetings. To say, let's not just talk about the project or the task at hand, but let's talk for a few minutes about how we can work together more effectively. And this is a really important thing to do when we're working remotely, because as we said earlier, everybody has a different sense of this. So one of the things that you can talk with your team members about, or if you're going into one-on-one conversation that might be a little bit touchy, or do you all need to agree to confidentiality, for example. As a leader, we would encourage you even more so during this time to explain and be a little bit more transparent about your work style and how things are going for you and what's going to work for you, but asking others what's working for them working remotely. Do they have any tips and tools? Explain and educate your team about your strengths and your desires as a leader. Be vulnerable or open when it's appropriate to do so, so that they feel like, hey, you're human too, just like they are. We also highly recommend establishing goals for the conversation in the meeting. I know that we all normally do this typically, but I think some people were starting to get a little bit lax with it as we get a little bit less motivated working remotely. And then make sure that at the beginning of meetings, as appropriate and as time permits, check in with people about anything that they need to talk about urgently. Check in regarding their feelings as well as tasks when appropriate. And do this a little bit more so, given we're all kind of in such a wonky situation, okay? Couple of other things in terms of structuring your relationships is kind of not always just dive right into the work on every call or video conference that you're on, but do a little bit of a gut check of energy. Like, how does your team seem to be feeling? How are they coming across? And don't step over it. If you notice someone might be struggling a little bit or has a different energy level than they normally do. I think normally in the rush of the day, we just tend to step over that kind of stuff and go on to the next thing. But pay more attention to it, because calling that out for people one-on-one and reaching out to them to check in can really help create that safe space a little bit more. if you have to talk with people about something that may be a little bit touchy, you need to give them some possibly difficult feedback or have a tough conversation with them. One of the things we recommend is to tell them in advance that you need to talk about something that's a little bit touchy and ask permission. So, hey, Sarah, I need to chat with you for a few minutes today about something. Can we set a time a little bit later? And then when you hop on the phone with them, just literally say in advance, I need to talk with you about something that may be a little bit hard to hear. Is it okay if we talk about that right now? Or something that's touchy, is it okay to chat about that? Or should we talk about it at a later time? Ask that permission, okay? As part of creating a safe space too, instead of always going in with, this is what we need to do next, et cetera, start to practice asking questions a little bit more to invite and encourage input and feedback. And finally, when you're creating or designing your relationships with people more effectively and coming up with these agreements, talk about how you would like to get feedback from them, not just that you would like to get it, but what's the best way for you to get it? Is it email or phone or whatever? And tell them you'll give them feedback, but ask them how they prefer to receive it as well, okay? So don't just go right into the work, bottom line, as part of this creating a safe space, but think about kind of the box that you all need to play in and agreements that you may need to create from scratch or create from scratch due to this working remotely so that you can more effectively address the tasks, the projects at hand, but also deal with any challenges that may arise, that you have these agreements in advance so you know how to handle them. Let's look at tip number 2, and this is 3 levels of listening. Most of you have probably heard about active and good listening before. Level 1 listening in the coaching world, we have 3 levels of listening I'll tell you about here. So level 1 listening is what we would say is your own inner dialogue, your own inner voice. Ooh, that sounds really hard, I'm hungry, etc. We have to have that to take care of ourselves, but we want good leaders to be more in levels 2 and 3. Level 2 is listed on this slide. It's focused on the other person a little bit more. And also, though, not just listening to the words that they're saying, but paying attention to their nonverbals and the nuances in their voice and their tone, okay? Because we want you to be listening out for what your employees or team members are not telling you just as much as what they are telling you. And that leads us into the 3rd level of listening. And this is global listening. It's the energy of the team. How is it shifting? What's going on for your team? How are they feeling? The mood or the tone of the conversation. And we would encourage leaders to call it out. It may not be appropriate to call it out in the group, but if you sense something going on with one of your employees, we encourage you to deal with that offline, one-on-one, and check in with them. Don't just skip over it and move on to the next thing. The way that you can get into these last 2 levels of listening a little bit more is to do a better job about, instead of just talking the whole time on your meetings, quieting down, stilling your body, slow down when you talk a little bit more, to give people airtime to interrupt and talk, but also to just kind of gauge the mood and tone of the conversation. Slow them down if needed too. And in some cases, you may need to have an agreement with your team or one-on-one that, hey, sometimes I might interrupt you and kind of guide you a little bit and just let them know in advance. And then finally, as we said, I think our human nature, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is to ask or to give advice all the time because we want to help and fix. And work on asking a question more often than giving advice. And even just that little tip, and let's go ahead and do our 3rd poll here. Do you currently employ effective listening based on what we're talking about with these 3 levels? But practice, even if you did just one thing in the next week, practice asking questions a little bit more when you're about to jump in and give advice. Shift to a question and notice how that changes the tone and mood of the conversation. All right, so we've got our 3rd, and this should be, I think, our last poll for today too, is do you currently employ effective listening skills on a consistent basis? That's the thing too. Sometimes our listening skills are better depending on the situation. We've got some great comments coming through too. I believe that to establish trust, you must have both empathy and the willingness to be open. I would totally agree with that, that it's all three, the trust, the empathy, and the kind of vulnerability, if you will. All right, so how are we doing with our poll? Let me just move this over here so I can see it. All right, good. Oh, good, we've got a great number that most people do. That's awesome. So for the 35% that say no, levels 2 and 3 is where you want to be. And for the people that feel like they're doing a good job with it, we would suggest working on the questions even more so in order to get to that level 3 of listening to. That's fantastic. Very good results there. All right, let me just make sure. Okay, yes. So let's talk next about tip number 3. I wanted to make sure I didn't skip a slide there. So the idea of coaching, as we said earlier, is more about guiding, not advising, okay? And I wanted to give you all just kind of a quick introduction, if you will, to this concept in coaching of powerful questions, okay? So powerful questions are open-ended questions. They're supposed to be kind of childlike, if you will, and they don't have judgment inside of them or behind them. And it allows the employee or person you're talking to kind of experiment with their own answers. Bottom line, powerful questions are open-ended. They will not allow for a yes or no response. And the reason why we like powerful questions so much is it also assumes like a positive outcome. So if you look at the examples on the bottom of the slide, number 1, it encourages conversation a little bit more. It's not like when I asked my 13-year-old, how was school? Fine. Like a powerful question is going to help encourage the conversation more than just a yes or no question. And the examples below too, how can we work together more effectively? What would you like to achieve from this project? What's another choice you could make here? It not only encourages the person to kind of play around with their own answers, it gets feedback from them as well. And it assumes that things will work out. How can we work together more effectively versus can we? Is it going to be possible? Is a much more positive way to ask a question. So it assumes or forces kind of positive intent or positive outcome. So practice not just with questions in general, but we would encourage you to think about when you're asking a question during a meeting or one-on-one, and you feel it kind of going towards this yes or no direction, stop in the middle of it and kind of change the tone or direction, if you will. And I say that only because a lot of people, when we've done live workshops and webinars as well, and have breakout rooms, people, and they're practicing with the powerful questions, they think it's very easy to do this, but they'll start asking their question and realize it's going in the yes or no direction, and they realize they need to kind of regroup and change it. So it actually is a skill that takes and can take a little bit of time to develop, and it's a really good one. This is one of my favorites. Let's talk next about tip number 4, and this is the importance of self-management. And as leaders, we all understand how critically important this is, especially during these times. So we were talking with a client this morning, actually, and bottom line, he's not in a good mood, or he wasn't today. His office, he happens to be in Atlanta, and they are doing 2 weeks at home, 1 week in the office, and he's getting sick of the back and forth. And it's okay for him to talk with us about his frustration, because we want him to go to manage himself with his team so he can be the leader and be positive and kind of help motivate them. So it's good to use friend, family member, colleague, whatever, within reason, to vent and kind of get whatever off your chest you need to, so that you can go back to your team in a positive light. As much as you can when you're working with others during this time, especially, you want to stay present with them, not thinking about your own stuff as much, but really like the active listening, like we said earlier, and listening to what they're not saying and kind of what their energy level is, and asking them about it. And the other thing we would highly recommend, as most of you probably know about, is emotional intelligence and managing those emotions effectively. And we wanted to recommend a book. This is one of the books we like the best for emotional intelligence at work and professionally. If you feel like this is something that's been harder for you to do, we've got lots of different things that we are talking with our clients about to kind of help them manage their schedule and their mood. We've had people, like set up and make their desk or office space at home a little bit more inviting and kind of cheery. They will close down their computer at a certain time at the end of the day and, not go back into that room if it's possible for them to do so. We've had other people start up a new hobby just so that they've got something that can bring joy into their lives a little bit more effectively. So highly recommend this book, but be mindful of taking care of yourself first and getting into the right headspace before you hop on any call or any meeting, so that you can be the positive influence and help kind of motivate your team. And when you're leading meetings, by the way, and we'll get to tip number 5 here in just a second, we don't want you to just think about, okay, what are the tasks or goals we have to perform or accomplish at the end of this meeting, but also think about kind of the soft side of your meetings. Do you need to motivate and inspire people during this meeting? Do you need to give them some tough feedback to kind of push them ahead? So also think about the intangible goals that you want to achieve for all of your meetings as well, because those can just be as critically important and in some cases more important than the actual tangible goals you need to achieve. Let's look at curiosity next, and this is tip number 5. So curiosity goes kind of hand in hand, I think, with the powerful questions enormously. And you want to be mindful because I think, even inadvertently when we don't mean to, sometimes a statement that we'll make or even a question that we'll ask someone can be leading them somewhere and have judgment inside of it versus being non-judgmental. And we want to encourage you to just be mindful of that and to practice being more of a coach when you have your coach hat on. Really just kind of imagine that you have no agenda for them and just ask them questions to see what kind of answers and perspectives they can come up with. Again, this is going to require really being in curiosity. Is going to require staying very present with them and the true listening. You can offer your opinion when appropriate, but hold back on that and really make an effort. When we talked about empathy earlier, curiosity is really about making an effort to understand their perspective and get into their shoes a little bit more. The reason why I bring up curiosity in general is when I received my coach certification several years ago, it was funny because in the 2 kind of preliminary classes we had, they actually didn't allow us to give anyone advice at all for those first, multi-day workshops that we had. And it was very hard to not do that because, again, our human nature is to fix and help. So it really does take some time to kind of build this muscle of curiosity. But if you say to yourself, for example, like 1 meeting per day, when it's appropriate to do so, say, I'm just going to ask questions for the first 10 minutes or whatever it is, and see how it changes the tone of the conversation and what comes out of it. It's a great way to implement that. Tip number 6, or coaching skill number 6, is to leverage your intuition a little bit more. I think understandably as leaders and, just any professional, honestly, we can get into our head and, we're at work. We're not really supposed to be talking about feelings as much. We're just about getting the job done. And it's a really good idea as a leader to regularly check in with your intuition, listen to what other people are not saying, like we've said before, and be willing to share like a gut instinct that you have or share your intuition as long as it's non-judgmental and kind of without attachment. When you're sharing your intuition, it's okay to say, by the way, I just have this gut feeling about this. What do you all think? It could be a word or an analogy that you share. We do this all the time with clients to say, the image that's coming to my mind is this. Does that make sense to you all? Because that can help people play around with different options. And also when you use a different, a feeling or an analogy, you're also going to be communicating in a different way to those employees that you have who learn in a different way. Some people learn by reading, by listening, etc. And you'll be able to kind of connect with them a little bit more as well by using different ways of communicating. So that's coaching skill number 6, and that's intuition. Coaching skill number 7 is obviously we want, as leaders and managers, to help our employees, hopefully, develop and learn and grow. Okay, so sometimes we do need to tell them what to do and tell them, these are your action items, and that's completely acceptable. So in some cases, we want you to think about, okay, what are the action items that you need to suggest if someone is struggling with coming up with their own answers? Help provide the accountability to them. And we wanted to say a little bit extra about this one, because keep in mind with this working remotely, some people are doing a better job of structuring and staying on top of their work than others, based on what their strengths are and their personality type. So for some employees, you may need to provide a little bit more accountability and ask them about it. What do you need from me? How can I help support you? Where are you excelling in this working remotely, and where are you struggling? And what can I do to help support you? You can give them suggestions. Do we need more frequent check-ins? Do you need to be able to, do you want to email me, for example, with a quick report at the end of the day every Friday? Will that help you with accountability? So you can brainstorm options with them, but make sure that you all talk about it. And then finally, the last item on this slide here is to keep in mind that sometimes action items are not something to write on their to-do list. It's not always something that's tangible that they have to go do and kind of check the box. Sometimes it's something that they need to learn, a skill that they need to develop or grow into, or a soft skill that they need to enhance, or something they need to go kind of figure out on their own or think about. So sometimes when we're coaching with our clients, we'll ask them a question and they'll say, I kind of need to noodle on that. I'm not really sure what the answer is. And so sometimes an action item for an employee, you might not need to require that they answer you right then. Give them that kind of homework assignment to think about in the next week or so as your action item. Okay. One thing before we get to our last 3 coaching skills for today, and we'll get to some Q&A here because I see some things coming through, which is great. We did want to offer everyone, if you need additional advice on your unique situation, because we realize that every situation is different, and we're happy to kind of tailor the advice to what may be going on for you as a leader. Feel free to email us for a strategy session with one of our coaches. The website or the email address is here. It's admin@halliecrawford.com. And it's also, we'd be happy to talk with you about our coaching services as well if you feel like you need some assistance there. All right, so let's talk about our last 3, 8, 9, and 10 coaching skills. And we've had people chatting about empathy in the chat box too, so this is perfect timing for that one. Having greater empathy is that experience of understanding someone from their point of view. Remember that it's not just about their thoughts or their feelings or kind of what's going on in their head. It's also can be about what their values are. And something that is a really good thing to get better at as a leader is to try to understand not just what your employees' strengths are, but also what their personality traits are and their values. And the reason why it's helpful to try to get a greater understanding of what their values are is because that's going to help you understand what motivates and drives them, how you can kind of speak their language a little bit more to get them kind of in the sweet spot of performance. So also I would add to this list of empathy, understanding what people's values are, what their personal values are, but also their career values. And as part of this, to help with your task or working towards greater empathy, we wanted to share this this model with you because our clients love this model. It's from the Gallup organization, and it's basically what they assert are the 4 needs of followers. Okay, and the Gallup organization is the place that owns the Strengths Finder assessment, which a lot of you have probably heard of. They just have a lot of good research behind them within their organization. And they assert that these are the 4 needs of followers. And by the way, when we say followers, we mean anyone who is part of an organization. Okay, they are in this order: trust, stability, compassion, and hope. And when you look at this and think about it, these are things that we all need as people, but we all would like to have ideally as professionals as well. So when you are, here's how to use this. highly recommend you print it out, put it on your desk. And when you are framing out or creating your agenda for all of your meetings coming up, take a look at this briefly. Do you need to help this individual team member a little bit more with their sense of stability, let's say, because your organization is going through so much change due to COVID? Does your team need a little bit more sense of direction and faith that things are going to be okay? Because, for example, your industry has been hard hit by COVID. So we had a client once, it's just a great example. She worked at the largest healthcare IT company worldwide, actually, very large organization. And when she took a look at this model as a leader, she realized that the majority, if not all, of the struggles or kind of complaints she had about her organization stemmed from each of these pieces. And what I mean by that is her organization and their, leaders were not articulating enough or providing enough communication in order to give people this sense of trust that they were respected, that leadership was being as honest with them about what was going on as possible, that they weren't giving them this sense of stability as much as they could have. So you want to be a source of strength for your team as much as possible, asking them what support they need, letting them know that things are going to be okay and that you will be as transparent with them as possible. And also that sense of compassion and hope. You'll get a sense of when a certain person or your team might need one of these pieces. And it's a really good idea during the course of each of your meetings to make sure that you communicate in some way around each of these pieces, to let people know that you're there for them. You have that sense of compassion, things are going to be okay, etc. So great way to help you structure kind of the soft side of your meetings. Let's look at coaching skill number 9 next. And we talked about recognizing everyone's strengths already, as well as their personality type and their values. What we would assert is that people's values, a lot of times, just FYI, because this can give you clues to what some of their values are, they can be intertwined with their strengths a lot of the time. And the way to know that someone is leveraging their strengths is, this is a quick, easy way, using this sign model, again, from the Gallup organization. When people are effective, when they seem to volunteer their time for a specific task or project, and they seem like excited to work on a specific task or project, that's a clue that they're about to, or they're leveraging one of their strengths. When they seem like in the zone and really focused, and they're inquisitive and kind of energized, and then after it's completed, they feel or seem to feel fulfilled and authentic, these are all clues that your team member or the person that you're working with or managing is leveraging one of their strengths. So pay more attention to this. Talk with your team members about, are they leveraging their strengths in a way that they would like to? And especially during working from home, has that their ability to leverage that strength, has it been diminished or changed in any way that they would like to adjust? And then finally, we want you to think about over time, as you incorporate all of these coaching skills, how you need to, or what you need to do differently maybe to work towards developing your own unique leadership style. And we would assert that your leadership style is a combination of these 4 items here: your strengths, your soft skills, your values, and your personality type. Okay, so think about, and we'll show you this last tool here that we really like as well, this top 10 leadership skills wheel. This is from Development Dimensions International. And these are the top 10 leadership skills that they assert are most important in today's workplace. So when you're thinking about, okay, who am I as a leader, and what are the strengths and skills I am already good at, and where do I need to make some adjustments and improvements, you can rank yourself on each one of these pieces of this model on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being fantastic. And this will help you kind of get a sense of where do you need to make some adjustments, improvements, and changes. And we would highly encourage you all, by the way, and we'll start to get to Q&A right now. We would encourage you all to have other people fill this out for you to get some of that transparent feedback and let them know that you're open to that feedback and input. Okay. So let's start to move towards Q&A as we begin to wrap up for the day today. And here are some possible action steps we wanted to recommend. You can work on filling out the leadership wheel if you fall in the category of, I kind of need to get a clear sense of where, what my top 3 needs are. It could be that, I really liked the 4 needs of followers. Need to work on that with my team because my team seems to be struggling a lot emotionally and kind of motivation wise. Strategy session, as we mentioned before. So Maura, we can go ahead and get to the questions actually, and I will leave these up for another minute and then I'll move to putting my contact information, because by the way, if we don't get to your question today, please feel free to email us. We're happy to answer.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I know I am impressed. You went through those in record speed, but without rushing. So thank you, because that's a lot of really good information. And I think a lot of us are processing everything. So this is great. There are 2 questions that have already come in while you were talking. The first one has to do when you talked about empathy in one of these last slides. Eric asks, how do you coach or lead if you think you might be too empathetic?
That's a great one. So what you may want to do, one kind of simple thing to start out with is, see it as a strength and continue to leverage it. But what you may want to do is kind of monitor your meetings and maybe set aside, okay, the first 5 minutes are going to be okay to talk about the, how people are doing and empathizing with them. And that's it though. Then you get to the rest of the meeting. So set a timer almost for yourself and time limits on the amount of time you're going to spend on that. Great question.
That's great. That's great. Yes, and it is a nice problem to have, to care too much about the people, but it can get in your way sometimes. So that's wonderful. Here's another great question that came up. They ask, how would one apply these skills successfully, thinking about these leadership skills and these coaching skills in a workplace that historically has operated in the opposite manner? Yes.
So start with you. It's kind of like when the airlines say, start with you first. I wouldn't say to you, like, make the assumption or have the goal of, I'm going to change the whole culture of the organization, right? But everything starts with you at the beginning. So even if that's not normally the case with people, start out with people that are on your team, maybe that would be a little bit more amenable and open to trying these tools out with the easier people to kind of get a little bit better at it and to set a different tone, because we say it's kind of like turning a big ship. It can take a little while, but we've had clients do it. So start with those easy people first. And as you start to shift the tone and the culture within your kind of pod and your department, that will help kind of shift things overall. Great question.
That's great. That's great. Another question that came in, great material here, but a lot of it, and definitely needs some digestion. Yes, I can relate. So they say, I'm a manager who wants to be a better coach today. What's the one specific thing that I should do?
I would work on powerful questions. I like those the best because they're easy enough to implement, but it's the best bang for your buck. So working on leveraging questions more frequently than diving into, what you want them to do, but also really focus on not having it be yes or no and a powerful question. That was a great question.
That's great. Another one is, in your experience, what gets in the way of managers being better coaches? As you said, sometimes people try and they don't even realize how hard it can be, particularly for these powerful questions. I guess, what do you find?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I've never had that one. I love it. I think that one example could actually be too much of any one of the skills. So like the person asked earlier about too much empathy, and they're not incorporating enough of these other tools, and that maybe they don't kind of flow between the different tools that they have. I think sometimes it's just flat out being too busy.
Mm.
and saying, that's not important. I just need to get the job done. So I don't have time to deal with any of this. I think that's unfortunately a common one. And then another one I think too is that they're just flat out kind of uncomfortable, and they might be afraid of what's going to come out, or maybe afraid of the feedback. So I would say, and that's actually perfect to this, and then we'll get our next question, is take a risk. You don't have to do this all day long, but try it a couple times and see what happens. And you can adjust it along the way in baby steps. Great question.
Well, and so thinking about that, about someone who might be kind of cringing and hesitant to launch that conversation, someone asks, what's your best advice for managing difficult employees?
Yeah, so I do a whole webinar on that one. And so I totally get how hard that can be and uncomfortable. I would also use the questions with them as well. So every time you are about to speak with that person, let's say in a one-on-one scenario, I would take the first several minutes to ask them questions. How are you doing? What's going on? How can I support you? Let them get things off their chest, because there may be something that's kind of bubbling inside that they're just not getting out and nobody's listening or whatever it is. So take some time at the beginning first to ask them questions, to get it off their chest and kind of clear the air a little bit if needed. And then get into, okay, what do you think we need to do differently? Do you have any thoughts on what we could change or adjust? How can I best support and help you? So getting into that empathy space a little bit more before making assumptions about what's going on with them. 9 times out of 10, whatever assumption we have about what's going on with them and why they're behaving that way is wrong. There's usually something else going on that we have no idea what's happening. So use the questions first.
That's great. That's great. Another question that came in asks about communicating across generations. And if you have different advice for how to do that effectively, if you are working within a multi-generation team, which most of us are these days.
Yep, totally. Great question. So with younger people, I would say that the questions are even more important, because they really want to feel heard. And actually, even though you don't necessarily have to take their advice, and we're not saying that you always should, give them some kudos and give them, hey, that's a good idea. Have kind of an answer that you'll say, that's a great idea. I'll take it into consideration. Can't promise we're going to implement it, but I like the concept, instead of just passing over it. So with the younger generation, they really want to feel heard a lot more than other generations, I think. So with the younger set, that's what I would do. And if it's the other way around, the older generation is, and I kind of fall into that category, I think a little bit at 48, is we kind of want to be heard too, and our opinion valued and respected. And we still want to feel respected for our wisdom and experience, and I'm admitting that I feel that way sometimes with younger clients. So be mindful of that too. Great question.
That's great. Well, and this one follows up in that similar vein. They ask, what leadership and management considerations and tips would you have for those who are significantly younger than the teammates that they lead? I know that's happening more and more in the workplace with these multi-generational teams and people changing jobs at different times. And I find that I hear this question fairly often from young managers who have a team that does have more wisdom than them, and how they can be seen as a leader.
Yeah. So be open to their input and feedback, get them on your side, so to speak. Let them know that you value and respect their experience and wisdom, and that you are open to hearing it, and that you would really like that. So kind of let them know you want to leverage their experience and expertise. And then if it ever kind of starts to cross the line, that's where you've got one hat on. And then if it starts to cross the line a little bit, that's where you may need to step in and say, thanks for that feedback. I'll take it into consideration. Not sure what we're going to do here yet, but I will let you know. So you might have to take a step back sometimes too, and make sure that you remind them in a gentle, kind of the right way, that I'm in charge at the end of the day. But I would squeeze the wisdom out of them if I were you.
Yes, yes.
For sure.
And it looks like we've got about time for one more question. So the last one I'll ask today is, what have you found to be a big reason for why leaders do not use coaching skills in their business? Why is this something that feels kind of revolutionary for many people?
Yeah, it's hard for me to say exactly. I mean, I think some of the answers would be similar to before. We just don't have the time. I think some people haven't thought about it. I think for some people it makes them uncomfortable. And I think it's just, I don't know, as long as coaching kind of as a profession has been around, I still feel like it's kind of new in a way. It's, it hasn't been around as long as like doctors, lawyers, etc. So I think some of these concepts are just, the workplace, if it's not forced to do this due to something like we are experiencing now, COVID or whatever, it's just kind of the same old, same old. And unless you have somebody come in and say, you guys need to do this, or someone who really wants a fresh perspective, it's just too easy to do same thing, different day, so to speak.
That's great. No, and I think you've really helped us to see how valuable this is for each of us. And I would argue that you don't even have to be a leader of other people in order to be an effective coach of your colleagues and your peers, an empathetic ear to listen to, and someone to encourage them and ask those powerful questions. So you can practice this even if you don't lead a team. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Hallie, for sharing all of this great tips. I know many people have asked or mentioned in the chat just how great this has been. It's wonderful to have your contact information here on the screen. For anyone who has a question after this, you can also email me in the alumni office. I'm at msweeney@holycross.edu. And as I mentioned, this has been recorded, and so we'll share that out with everyone. And Hallie was gracious to share a handout that I'll be sending in a follow-up email so that you can continue working on some of these skills and really put them into practice. I encourage you to think about that list of 10 and pick out those 2 or 3 that you really want to focus on, because the more people we can get who are coaching their colleagues and coaching their employees, I think the better our workplaces will be.
Yeah, huge. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. So appreciate it.
Wonderful. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care.